Hi, my name is Lori Williams, and I'd like to introduce our software security class. First, before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself, and my assistants can introduce themselves as well. So I'm Lori Williams. I'm a full professor at NC State University and also the interim department head. I am the co-director of an NSA-sponsored Science of Security lablet. I've been at NC State for 17 years, and my primary research area is security.
I'm Chris Tyson. I'm a fourth-year PhD student under the advisement of Lori Williams here. I study empirical metrics that help security professionals prioritize their work.
And I'm Ted Ju. I'm a first-year PhD student at Duke University, where I specialize in robotics. I have an undergraduate degree in computer science at The Ohio State University.
Great. And so let me just tell you what we're going to do here. And so each week we'll have a little introductory video, and that's this. And so what we're going to do each week is just talk a little bit informally about some breaches that have occurred in the news recently. And hopefully you'll see from that, breaches are happening all the time, and a lot of them involve the principles that we'll be learning in the class. And so we're going to get started with some of the breaches for this week.
Right. So we wanted to start off with a big one. So in the last couple of weeks, you may have heard about a breach involving the cloud service provider CloudFlare, where a lot of private data and passwords and sessions were leaked to the general public. So essentially what happened was that some cached data was starting to show up in Google caches that you could search for using certain keywords based on what data was present that was being leaked. And it turned out that every single Cloudflare user and customer was leaking this data. It was something that was affecting every single website that was using the Cloudflare service. So if you ever logged into a Cloudflare website, if you ever had a session active, such as hitting Remember Me and staying connected to, say, your a social media account that was behind Cloudflare, you were potentially affected by this bug. Google and Cloudflare worked together to remove all these caches and try to protect users, but what ended up happening was that a lot of this information was saved by people to various darknet places. So a lot of our password data just is still out there today.
And so how did this happen? So it happened way down under the covers. There was a less than and equal, that it should have been a less than and equal in a certain test, but instead it was a double equal. And that is what caused the system to be able to have a buffer overflow. So it just shows really careful programming is essential for security.
And how one little character change can really cause these types of issues to happen, and how important it is to have this sort of manual inspection to catch this bug.
Yeah.
This was initially intended to be code that was only going to be used for test purposes, but as sometimes happens, code that was only used for testing, as we'll see later, gets pushed into production.
Yeah.
Now, it seemed like this bug was actually laying dormant in their code base for several years, but it was only a recent configuration change in the CloudFlare software that caused the less than or equal to error to happen, and then that brought this bug, or the exposed caches, to be public on the Google cached servers.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. And that just shows that sometimes we just think, well, as long as no one can see it, it's okay if there's a vulnerability there. People can't get to it. And it just takes one little setting and all of a sudden it's exposed. So we really want to try to have our code all be secure.
I think the other thing that this was actually, in news articles and such things, it really highlighted the fact that users really shouldn't do things like reuse passwords, some of these other standard security practices we hear about from our CSOs and our security conscious people at our companies. But a lot of us do. A lot of us do reuse passwords and use similar strings for their passwords. And it was a situation where even if one site you were using was behind the Cloudflare system, it could affect a bunch of other sites that were not behind it simply because you reused that password. So it really highlights the importance of using good personal security policy.
Yeah, good point.
And in fact, Cloudflare is actually one of the most popular web caching software providers that provide this content delivery to many major websites. So you should check the list of websites that Cloudflare does provide hosting for, and to see if maybe you did submit a password or login entry during one of these websites.
Yeah, so 3 that were cited often were Fitbit, OkCupid, and Uber. So if you have accounts on those sites, you might just want to change your password and change it in other places as well.
There'll be a link to an article that sums up everything that happened with this breach below this video, and you can actually check to see the full list of sites that were affected there. So at this point, I think we should move on to our second breach.
Okay.
We're going to talk about a remote code execution exploit involving the Moodle platform. Moodle is a platform that is used by a lot of educational organizations to help organize grades, submit class materials. If you've been at a university in the last few years, you probably made use of Moodle. It's very widely used both in the US and throughout the world. The problem here was actually not one vulnerability, but a series of small vulnerabilities that resulted in a big problem. Essentially, attackers could execute a chain of exploits that resulted in escalating privilege over time, eventually resulting in being able to send arbitrary code to an update command that allowed you to modify any piece of data in the Moodle backend database that you wanted. And being able to access that functionality ultimately meant the attacker had full run of the system. They could update permissions for their personal users, so they could have admin privileges with the whole thing, among other horrible things that could happen.
Yeah, and one part of the small vulnerabilities was a part of the code where the intent of the system designers was that only component developers would use certain parts of the API, but then regular developers started to use those APIs. And, so the design says they shouldn't do it, but guess what? People do with things. You don't design them for people to do it, but they do it anyway.
So that's why it's a good idea to implement strict software policies, even among different levels of developers in your code base. And the thing with Moodle was that it was such a large code base that it was starting to be hard to manage all the different pieces of code. And these pieces of code have to talk together. And with so many different developers and different protocols for talking to each other, without that consistent policy for how you can access data from the database, it allowed many bugs like this to show up.
Yep, in a practical sense, when you have a big organization like the team that supports Moodle, you end up having new people come onto the team who may not be familiar with those policies or familiar with the fact that this specific call was supposed to be only used in a specific context. It's something that a large companies run into all the time when they're trying to spin up new team members, move people around, et cetera. And so having clear guidelines on where stuff is supposed to be used can help mitigate some of these issues, but it's not something you can really fully prevent from happening. So this is why having your senior people do code review and keep in mind, we shouldn't be using X module in Y place because it really was never meant for that purpose is an important thing to do.
Yeah, good point.
So our last breach, we'll go through a breach that was found in GitHub Enterprise's server console for the enterprise software package was delivered in a VirtualBox VM that had all the code that was running in it. By the fact that they delivered all this code to end users, which is a pretty common use case these days, they actually left a shared secret in plain text and which allowed users to arbitrarily sign cookies of their own construction to execute code remotely on GitHub's primary servers.
Yeah, and it just shows, like, plain text is 2017. We should know better than that. And there's all kinds of breaches that you read in the news. There could be medical information, other sensitive information, and there was a breach, and it's like, really? Plain text? Medical information. So, we will be talking about cryptography in this class, and you really just need to know if it's sensitive information, you never store it in plain text.
And one of the things about this specific code breach is that they tried to cover it up, they tried to hide their code using a concept known as code obfuscation. And what that does is it just kind of entangles the data in a way that is hard for you to just read it. But if you knew the right way that they obfuscated it, you could just easily get it back in plain text format.
Yeah, and there's a design principle in security. No security through obscurity. And that's an example of them thinking that it was security.
This is another case where GitHub, when they explained how the breach happened publicly, it was another case where test code got pushed out to the public that was really never supposed to be used by outside users. So that making sure you have those strong divides between production and test is really, really important. But even organizations that with such mature processes as GitHub make these mistakes. So it means that anybody can make this mistake. It's a really simple thing to do.
Yeah, true. All right, so let me explain now how the course is going to work. So now you've watched this introductory video. Each week you'll have 2 short videos. We tried to make them about 10 minutes each. We'd like you to read those or listen to those videos, and then each video has 5 multiple choice and true-false questions. So answer those. And then also each week you'll have what's called a Silver Bullet podcast. These were podcasts that were taped by Cigital under the direction of Dr. Dr. Gary McGraw. And these are interviews by experts. And so we'd like you to listen to those. Those are about 30 minutes, but I think you'll find them interesting. They're experts and some nice broad issues that are going on in the security field, and answer questions for those as well. And also each week there'll be some extra links so that more resources. In the beginning of the course, we're going to be looking at a lot of exploits, and some of the videos that will be linked there will give you more information about that. But each week there'll be some extra resources for you to take a look at. Through the course, if you answer all of those the quizzes, by the end of the course, we will issue you a certificate to show that you completed the course.
Thanks so much for your attention. We hope you found this informative. Good luck with the material this week, and we'll see you next week.
We look forward to having you in the class.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.